Until the 1920s, when it was overtaken by Harlem, the U Street corridor was home to the nation's largest urban African American community. In its cultural heyday, it was known as Black Broadway, a phrase coined by singer Pearl Bailey. While the area remained a cultural center for the African American community through the 1960s, the neighborhood began to decline following the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. The intersection of 14th Street and U Street was the epicenter of violence and destruction during the 1968 Washington, D.C. riots. Following the riots and the subsequent flight of affluent residents and businesses from the area, the corridor became blighted. Drug trafficking rose dramatically in the mid-1970s when the intersection of 14th and U Streets was an area of drug trafficking in Washington, D.C. In spite of that, the community has made redevelopment a priority so that the area will provide desirable commercial products. Even though many years have passed and the African American population has decreased, most businesses continue to identify with the legacy of U Street that makes this neighborhood unique.
What do I know about U Street? I know that it's a very good time, and you can get some really good food there. It's a little annoying to get to. I don't go as often as I would like, but I think it's a lot of fun. I have absolutely no idea what the history of U Street is.
I don't know too much about that neighborhood and the changes, but from what I understand about what's going on U Street and what was happening in Northeast and Southeast, there was a lot of tension, and the neighborhoods have changed.
I actually used to work in the U Street Howard area. I worked at a recording studio right across the street from Howard, so I spent a whole summer just exploring that area and finding a lot of cool stuff there.
I've never worked there, but I've definitely gone for Ethiopian food there many times.
That's the best.
My favorite spot is there, and it's actually open till 5 a.m., and it's really like one of the coolest spots I know in DC. So.
And Ben's Chili Bowl. Ben's Chili Bowl is awesome.
I lived in Shaw area, and I lived, like right now, I live in U Street area, and it changed in the last 2 years, of course.
I don't know much about U Street, to be honest with you. When looking up things to do on Halloween, I saw that they had $3 Coronas and maybe 6 bars doing that, so that's exciting.
So U Street and Howard area, as a student and resident of Washington, it's a place where I will go, for good nightlife, for good restaurants, a very eclectic scene, an area that's grown and developed very rapidly in the past several years and feels very dynamic. And I love going down there and going to Busboys and Pedwich, for instance, or all the awesome bars and awesome coffee stops as well further down 14th.
It's changed a lot. Whenever I first moved in, U Street and just the Howard Shaw area in general was very cultural, I think is a good word to describe it. It was a great place to go if you kind of wanted to get a feel for DC. You would see the row houses and kind of the original form, and you had little cultural spots. You had some bigger restaurants, but you would also have some little chain not chains, hole in the wall restaurants. Or you'd also have some independent places. So it was just very diverse, and it was a fun little place to kind of not feel overwhelmed.
Well, I guess my experience with U Street goes back to the times that I've gone out at night and enjoyed libations at the bars there.
When my mom lived in D.C. in the 80s, as he said, you would never go down 14th Street ever, and now it's considered one of the hottest places to be in town.
Just it's a reflection of how much the neighborhood changed. When I was in junior high in Washington, D.C., the big insult was, I saw your mama at 14th and U. That was the big insult.
And now it's gotten a little bit more, I guess, structured would be a good word for it. In place of some of the old row houses, you see more apartment buildings springing up and people developing more things, including old buildings that used to, I think, be public buildings. We've had a couple of buildings around campus, used to be campus buildings, get bought out, and they would change them into apartment buildings and developments and stuff.
In the late 70s, mid to late 70s, right? Maybe 77, 78, my youngest sister was a lifeguard at apartment buildings on 14th and N, around that area. And she used to tell me that during the day, when it was busy, when it wasn't busy, when it was real quiet, when she was being a lifeguard, she would look over the rooftop edge down below on 14th Street and watch the prostitutes working. That's what it was like in the mid to late 70s on 14th Street.
It's getting a little better, I think, but still, I think that U Street is a little dangerous area, actually, even at night. Still, like around our block, we have some crimes around night, and I go running sometimes at 5 a.m. in Meridian Hill Park, which is right next to Belmont and 15th. And even at 5 a.m., some people already sell some interesting stuff.
I think anytime you're able to change the demographic in a nation's capital, then it's a positive sign.
You have on one hand the ethical component of you have a lot of people living in these neighborhoods originally who have been there for decades and generations and all of a sudden can afford to live in their own homes. On the other hand, you also had services that were completely lacking in these neighborhoods. It was not safe in many cases.
Is this about gentrification? How did I guess? It's an ethical problem, but it's a natural occurrence given the nature of markets. And so it's an ethical problem that stems from kind of the larger composition of our society. And, it's not something that someone's deliberately, imposing upon them. But there are policies that make it worse.
It's a DC problem in general. The cost of living, how it's pretty astronomical and hard, especially with the average amount of money that a person makes in DC for anyone to afford rent. But it's getting worse in the areas that they choose to start building these new complexes, and start building these new apartment buildings, because the newer something is, even more expensive it's going to be. So that's kind of like pushing out people who have been there for years.
And were native to those neighborhoods don't feel included in their decision making, don't feel like they feel like they no longer have a stake in their community. And that's going to be a really tough thing to digest when you see the place around you changing, you don't have a stake in it, no one asks your opinion, and that's your home, that's your childhood. These are, the stories and the homes of the city are things that you wanted to pass down from generation to generation, and that no longer is a possibility for many people in the city.
When I was a freshman at GW in 1978, my first semester in college, I took a course called DC Past and Present. I was very happy to take that course. And we studied gentrification, and this was 1979, before you were born. So this issue of gentrification ain't nothing new, just changes neighborhood.
U Street, where everyone wants to be.